Hello everyone, in this video I'll be counting down my 7 favourite deceased Walking Dead characters who you've probably forgotten about. The goal of this video is to take a look at some of the best lesser known side characters who have appeared on the show since its incarnation, and to cast a spotlight on those characters who wouldn't normally be the topic of discussion. There are several criteria which I've decided a character must fit into in order to be chosen for this list. Firstly, as the title sort of explains, the character must be confirmed dead. So that means there is no room for someone like Heath whose whereabouts are currently unknown. Secondly, the character must have not appeared in more than 16 episodes of the show, excluding flashbacks. With 16 episodes being the normal length of a Walking Dead season, I feel that any character who has appeared in more than said amount is probably likely to be well known by the fanbase and wouldn't really fit in this list. So unfortunately T-Dog, I'm going to have to leave you out. Lastly, I've only included characters that I am fond of, so that means that even though the likes of Dale and Eastman may fit both the initial 2 criteria, they also don't make the cut. Anyway, I've gone on for long enough already, so let's not waste any more time and get straight into it. I can already hear the collective screams of viewers asking me why on earth I've included the dorky Woodbury scientist Milton on this list. Well, granted, he wasn't the bravest or strongest character to appear on the show, but I still found him to be engaging to watch and actually quite likeable. Milton was introduced at a time on the show when people were still trying to learn more about the Walker epidemic, whereas now The Walking Dead seems to have stopped caring completely about any attempt at finding a cure or reasoning behind the outbreak. Milton, with his limited resources, tried to do his best to gather as much information as he could. Okay, yes, he was doing so because the governor wanted to find a cure for his daughter, but it was still interesting to see a character take the time to study walkers. Despite him spending most of his time on the show under the governor's thumb, he eventually plucked the courage to stand up to him. He decided to warn Andrea about the governor's plans to kill everyone at the prison, he set fire and killed some of the walkers the Woodbury leader was keeping, and finally when asked to kill Andrea he refused and fought back against the governor, resulting in his death. To me, this illustrates the scope of change that his character went through during his stay on the show. When we first met Milton, he was terrified of the governor and would never think of second guessing him. However, as time went on, he began not only to become more aware of the brutality of his actions, but also more vocal in expressing his disdain. He's probably on a similar level of intelligence to Eugene, and I feel that if Milton was still alive now, he could have proved to be a useful asset to Rick in his continued fight against the Saviors. The second entry on this list also goes to another lone scientist, that being the CDC's last surviving employee, Edwin Jenner. Although, as I mentioned in my Ranking the Walking Dead Seasons video, I did find the entire CDC storyline to be very out of place when compared to the rest of the series, I did still enjoy Jenner as a character. The Walking Dead differentiates itself from other zombie franchises due to the fact that finding out the cause of the undead outbreak was not really of a concern for its protagonists. Instead, its focus is more on how said characters cope in the post-apocalyptic zombie-infested world. However, despite this, I will admit it was kind of cool to learn more about the walkers via Jenner and his AI Vi, as well as the state of the rest of the planet outside the USA. I also liked Jenner's brief video diary which featured during the episode Wildfire. It detailed his struggle as he soldiered on in an attempt to find a cure despite losing contact with everyone on the outside. Looking back on it now, this sequence kind of reminds me of a bleaker, much shorter version of the movie The Martian. And in fact, I think I wouldn't mind seeing more footage of Jenner slowly descending into madness as he worked in isolation at the CDC. Of course, I know that in the end, Jenner turned out to be a bit of a dick who tried to kill everyone, but you can't deny that he wasn't interesting. And hey, without him, Rick wouldn't have learnt that everyone was infected, and Jackie wouldn't have been able to get the quick death she desired. So I guess it wasn't all bad. Moving away now from 2 intellectuals to a character who probably doesn't even know the meaning of the word, as the number 5 entry on this list goes to Axel. Axel had the longest run out of any of the original prisoners that Rick and Co encountered, and as time went on I feel he became more trustworthy and more likeable, to the point where I was actually quite annoyed when the governor ended him by shooting him through the head. It was obvious to me from the start that he wasn't like the other prisoners. He wasn't a murderer and didn't really pose much of a danger to anyone. In fact, he was a bit of a gentle, quiet soul. I mean, look at the way the prisoner Thomas killed Big Tiny without a care in the world after he was scratched by a walker. This act clearly shocked Axel and upset him, and wasn't something he would ever be capable of doing. To be honest, I don't think Axel was really ever a bad person. he was just a bit stupid. I mean, not many people get imprisoned after trying to rob a store with a water pistol. There was something about his childlike naivety which I found quite endearing though, and he also actually cracked a few decent jokes that made me chuckle every now and then, even if they weren't always intentional. Perhaps his best moment, well, not for him, was when he informed Carol that he thought she was a lesbian when being asked why he was talking to Beth. By the end of his time on the show, Axel and Carol had developed some real chemistry, and it was a shame he died just as the two were beginning to learn more about one another. When you take into consideration the fact that the world in which The Walking Dead is set in has pretty much gone to shit, it's easy to forgive people for being pretty damn miserable. Admittedly, when Bob was first introduced, he was haunted by his past. However, after surviving the governor's assault on the prison, Bob transformed into a surprisingly cheery and optimistic guy. In fact, I would go as far as saying he ended up being one of the merriest characters to ever appear on the show. Granted, his joyfulness could be put down to the fact that he may have been having a sneaky swig of alcohol every 5 minutes to keep his spirits up, but I'll admit I found his positive attitude to be kind of infectious. During the 14 episodes in which he starred in, I couldn't help but like him, even if his drink problem did at times put the rest of the group in danger. I remember a scene in which he was strolling around alongside Sasha talking about how glorious and wonderful the day was. And with how depressing The Walking Dead can be, it was nice to see a character on the show so full of life and vigour. Speaking of Sasha, I felt like Bob's and Sasha's romance was very well thought out and appeared to be genuine. In fact, I feel that Bob and Sasha had much more of a romantic connection than Sasha and Abraham ever did, despite the fact that The Walking Dead tried to force Sasha and Abe's relationship down the viewers' throats as much as possible. Bob also managed to pull off the iconic tainted meat scene to great effect, and I found his death during the episode 4 Walls and a Roof to be both sad and touching, but also kind of uplifting. In typical Bob fashion, he stayed smiling to the end, and witnessing him tell Sasha how much he enjoyed his time with her before he passed on also brought a smile to my face. I've mentioned in a previous video before how much I like Jessie, and to say that my opinion was met with a lukewarm reception is kind of an understatement. Still, despite the fact that it seems that most of my viewers didn't really care for her, I still thought she was a decent character, and I thoroughly enjoyed Alexandra Breckenridge's take on the doomed Alexandrian. I feel that Jessie came a long way in a relatively short space of time. When we first met her, she was a housewife scared of her abusive husband, who was resigned to the fact that she would spend the rest of her days in a relationship with a complete arsehole. However, with Rick's help, she managed to pluck the courage to stand up to Pete, culminating in her asking him to move out of their shared house. After Pete's death, you'd be forgiven for thinking that she would regress somewhat by going back into her shell. However, instead she did the exact opposite and only continued to grow even stronger. This was illustrated by her giving a speech to the people of Alexandria urging them to fight against the looming Walker threat, as well as finding the courage to kill a wolf who had entered her house and taking care of a zombified Betsy. I also feel that although Rick and Jessie didn't have a huge amount of time on screen together, there was a definite sexual tension between the two, something the show has been sorely lacking since her death. She was definitely presented in a much better light than the constantly whining Laurie, and I know there are a huge amount of Michonne fans out there who aren't going to agree with me, but I feel that Rick and Jessie made more sense than Rick and Michonne, as I just still don't see any kind of real spark between them. Of course, I do understand why Jessie was killed. In a way, I feel her story arc was far too similar to the ever-present Carol's. I mean, both ladies were abused by their husbands, and both would go on to find the strength to become survivors in the new world. However, despite this, I still wish Jessie made it through No Way Out, as I would have liked to see more of her. Sometimes a great villain doesn't have to stick around for an awfully long time to leave a lasting impression, and Gareth, despite only appearing in 4 episodes, in my opinion still manages to rub shoulders with the like of the Governor and Negan due to his fantastic on-screen presence and sadistic appetite for human flesh. The leader of the Terminus group of cannibals instantly made an impact as soon as he was on screen, showing the extent of his power and confidence as he easily forced Rick and his group into a boxcar against their will, where they would wait until Gareth deemed it the right time for them to be slaughtered. His extremely calm demeanour during the next episode No Sanctuary when walking into a room of men having their throats slit and blood drained in order to be eaten showed what a cold monster he really was. To Gareth, the whole procedure was just merely a routine, nothing more than a job to be done. I mean, the fact that he casually walked into the slaughter room just to ask one of his workers about the state of the camp's ammunition, without a care in the world regarding the dead corpses propped over the bathtubs, he had normalised the entire process. Killing people and eating them wasn't something to be shocked or disgusted at, it was just the way his group done things, which in my mind makes him an even more messed up antagonist. I spoke earlier about Mr. Tainted Meat Bob, citing how well he performed during that iconic scene, and I also want to point out that Gareth also did his part by delivering a chilling speech when feasting on Bob's cooked leg. He was also pretty darn creepy when trying to convince Carl to surrender with Judith when he entered the church in the run-up to his final moments. I know that many viewers and critics complain that Gareth and the rest of the group of cannibals were killed off too early, but I think his short stay on the show actually made him a better villain than if his arc was dragged out over the course of entire seasons. Unlike the Governor and even, dare I say it, Negan, who both perhaps have some shred of humanity buried deep down inside them somewhere, Gareth just radiated pure evil, and the show deserves credit for managing to do so without making him feel like a stereotypical over-the-top comic book villain. Truth be told, when I decided the criteria for this list and came up with the names of which characters would feature, it was pretty obvious to me immediately who would place at number 1, with that honour deservedly going to Michael Rooker's Merle Dixon. Unlike a lot of the other characters on this list, Merle wasn't immediately likeable. In fact, when first introduced, he was a racist swine who Rick ended up chaining to the roof of a building with him not to be seen again, apart from an appearance during a hallucination of Daryl's until season 3. He reappeared when Andrea was reunited with him when she arrived in Woodbury, and for me he was one of the standout characters during the 3rd season of the show. Over the course of the prison arc, Merle underwent a change from being the governor's lapdog and carrying out tasks for him whenever he snapped his fingers, to ultimately redeeming himself by letting Michonne escape and trying to take down the governor himself. His death resulted in a huge personality leaving the show, causing a void that arguably still hasn't been filled. Whether you liked Merle as a person or not, you can't disagree with the assertion that Michael Rooker did a fantastic job every time he was on screen, and the guy's career is only going from strength to strength at the moment, which is a sign of his acting prowess. The older Dixon brothers' continued presence also allowed the viewer to learn more about Daryl and his past, which in turn helped make his character a lot more interesting. Witnessing Merle for the first time see the scars his abusive father had left on his baby brother made for some emotional viewing, and seeing the effect his death had on Daryl was pretty heartbreaking. I do acknowledge that Merle did some horrible things on his time on the show, such as killing poor Gargiulio and beating the crap out of Glenn, leaving him to fight for his life. But as with the previous entry on this list, Gareth, I believe that a character doesn't necessarily have to always be a good person in order for them to be considered a good character. Merle was a bit of a scumbag, but he did have a heart. He cared for his brother, and when push came to shove, he sacrificed himself attempting to do the right thing. He was also more complex than most people give him credit for, as proven during a conversation with Herschel in which he recites verses of the Bible and expresses a surprising love he has for reading. For me, Merle is the best deceased character out there that I feel a lot of people may have forgotten about. So there you have it, my list of 7 great deceased The Walking Dead characters you've probably forgotten about. As always, please let me know your thoughts below, perhaps you agree or disagree with me, and until next time, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.